Imagine silence. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of a held breath. The year is 1348. We are standing on a wooden dock in the south of England. The water creates a rhythmic slapping sound against the hull of a merchant ship. Slap, slap, slap. This ship has travelled from Gascony, or perhaps deeper from the Mediterranean. It carries silk, it carries spices, it carries wine. But inside the dark, damp hold of the ship, it carries something else. Something invisible to the human eye, yet heavy with destiny. Welcome to the London Gritty Chronicles. I am your guide through the shadows of history. Today, we are not looking at kings or queens. We are not looking at wars fought with swords. We are looking at a war fought on a microscopic scale. A war that changed the English language and the human population forever. Our topic is the transmission chain. Listen to that phrase, transmission chain. In English, a chain connects things together. One link holds the next. If you break the chain, the system fails. If the chain holds, the result, in this case, the Great Plague, is inevitable. Today, we will break down exactly how a tiny flea, riding on a rat, managed to infect humanity. We will slow down the history. We will freeze time. We will look at the biology. And along the way, we will master the English verbs of movement and process, carry, harbour, transmit, and infect. Are you ready to step onto the dock? The ship docks. A heavy rope is thrown. It lands with a thud. This is the first connection between the infected world and the clean island. In history, we often look for a villain. We want a bad guy. But in this story, the first character is not evil. It is simply an animal doing what animals do. Meet the black rat. The scientific name is Rattus rattus. Please note the specific name. This is not the brown rat we see in modern subway stations or sewers today. The black rat of the 14th century was different. It was smaller. It was an agile climber. It loved high places. It lived in the rafters, in the roofs, and in the attics of wooden houses. On this ship, the black rat is a stowaway. Here is a useful word for you, stowaway. The rat does not know it is a stowaway. It only knows it is hungry. It smells grain on the dock. It smells waste in the streets. So, as night falls, the rat scampers down the rope. To scamper. This is a verb describing quick, light, running movements. Small animals scamper. The rat hits the wooden planks of the dock. It runs into the shadows of the warehouse. It has arrived. But the rat is not alone. The rat is a vehicle. In this context, a vehicle is not a car or a bus. In biology and epidemiology, a vehicle is something that moves a pathogen from one place to another. But we have a more specific scientific word for this. The rat is the vector. But what is it carrying? Deep in the fur of the rat, hidden near the warm skin, is a passenger. It is tiny. It is about the size of a sesame seed. It has 6 legs and no wings. This is the oriental rat flea, or Xenosiliciopis. This flea is our second character. And inside the flea, that is where the true terror hides. Inside the stomach of the flea lives a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. So, look at the chain. We have 3 layers. 1. The bacteria, Yersinia pestis. 2. The flea, the carrier of the bacteria. 3. The rat, the transport for the flea. If any of these 3 links are broken, London remains safe. If the rat falls into the water and drowns, safe. If the flea dies of cold, safe. If the bacteria cannot survive in the flea, safe. But nature is efficient. Nature finds a way. Let's focus on the English grammar of this situation. We need to distinguish between carrying and infecting. The rat carries the flea. The flea carries the bacteria. At this exact moment, on the dock, the rat is not sick. It is simply a host. The rat is the host to the flea. The flea feeds on the rat's blood. It is a parasitic relationship. For centuries, rats and fleas lived together. They traveled the Silk Road from Central Asia. They moved across the Crimea. They boarded ships in Italy. They were old companions. Usually, this relationship is annoying for the rat, but not fatal. But something has changed. The bacteria, Yersinia pestis, has evolved. It has developed a mechanism that turns this peaceful ride into a suicide mission. The ship is now empty. The sailors have gone to the taverns. The cargo is being unloaded. The rat has moved into the city. London in 1348 is not a city of wide avenues and steel glass. It is a city of wood, straw, and mud. It is a city of narrow lanes. We call them alleyways. The houses lean together. The roofs almost touch. This architecture is important. Why? Because the black rat is a climber. Remember, the black rat loves roofs. In English, we often call the material used for roofs in this period thatch. Thatch is warm. Thatch is dense. Thatch is the perfect hotel for a rat family. So, the infected rat from the ship finds a mate. They climb into the thatch of a bakery or a house near the river. They begin to nest. To nest. This leads us to the first major sequencing concept: multiplication. You might think one rat is not a problem, but biology is a game of numbers. Rats breed quickly. Fleas breed quickly. Bacteria breeds the fastest of all. We are standing at the edge of a precipice. The city sleeps, unaware that the countdown has started. The transmission chain is currently silent. It is happening inside the bodies of the animals, unseen by human eyes. Historians often debate exactly how fast this initial spread happened. Did it take weeks, months? Evidence suggests that before humans started dying, the rats started dying. Wait, why would the rats die? This is the twist. This is the accidental mechanism that forces the disease to jump to humans. The plague does not want to kill humans. Ideally, a disease wants its host to live a long time, so it can spread. If the host dies, the disease often dies with it. Yersinia pestis is actually a disease of rodents. It is a rat disease. Humans are an accident. We are collateral damage. Collateral damage. We are the accidental victims of a biological civil war occurring between the bacteria, the flea, and the rat. How does this war begin? It begins with a biological trick inside the flea's stomach. A trick so cruel and effective that it turned a minor nuisance into the Black Death. In the next part, we must shrink down. We have to go microscopic. We need to look at the anatomy of the flea, to understand the verb to block. Because before the biting starts, before the fever starts, there is hunger, a terrible, impossible hunger. The rat is safe in the thatch roof. The flea is warm in the fur. The bacteria is multiplying in the gut. The calm before the storm is ending. We are now inside the belly of the beast. Well, not a beast. A flea. Xenosilla Chiopis. To understand the tragedy of London, you must understand the tragedy of the flea. The flea is not evil. The flea is simply hungry. It wants to drink blood, digest it, and be happy. But the bacteria, Yersinia pestis, has a different plan. Inside the flea's stomach, the bacteria begins to multiply. One bacterium becomes 2, 2 become 4, 4 become 8. Within days, millions of bacteria crowd the stomach of the flea. They secrete a sticky substance. They glue themselves together. They form a solid mass. A plug. In biology, This is called a biofilm. Think of it like a cork in a wine bottle, or a stone in a garden hose. This plug moves to the flea's proventriculus. That is a difficult word. Let's just call it the valve. This valve connects the flea's mouth to its stomach. Now, the valve is closed. The biological door is shut. Here is the key verb, to block. The bacteria blocks the digestive tract. Now, imagine the flea. It is starving. It is desperate. It lands on the skin of the black rat. It bites. It sucks blood. But the blood cannot enter the stomach. The plug of bacteria stops it. The fresh blood hits the blockage and has nowhere to go. So, what happens? Physics takes over. The blood mixes with the bacteria in the throat, and then it shoots back out. This action gives us a very disgusting, but very important verb. Regurgitate. And the flea regurgitates infected blood back into the rat. Do you see the cycle? 1. The flea feels starvation because it is blocked. 2. The flea bites repeatedly and frantically, trying to eat. 3. The flea regurgitates the bacteria into the host. The rat is the first victim. The bacteria floods the rat's system. It attacks the lymph nodes. The rat grows weak. It moves slowly. It stops climbing the thatch. Finally, it dies. In 1348, people likely saw dead rats in the streets. They probably stepped over them. They did not scream. They did not run. To a medieval Londoner, a dead rat was just garbage. It was a nuisance. Nuisance. They did not know that the dead rat was a warning sign. It was a biological bomb that had just detonated. Why? Because of temperature. A flea needs warmth. As long as the rat is alive, the body is warm. The flea is happy, but when the rat dies, the body goes cold. Fleas hate the cold. So the army of fleas living in the fur of the dead rat begins to panic. They need a new host. They need warm blood. Immediately. This triggers a new action, to seek. The fleas seek a new home. They crawl out of the cold fur. They hop onto the wooden floorboards. They are starving because they are still blocked. They are aggressive. Now, look at the room again. It is a small house in London. The floor is covered in rushes, dried grasses used as a carpet. It is dusty. It is intimate. In the corner there is a straw mattress. Sleeping on that mattress is a family. A mother, a father, perhaps 3 children, huddled together for warmth. The fleas smell the carbon dioxide from their breath. They sense the body heat. The fleas do not prefer human blood. We are not their favorite food. We are the backup plan. But a starving flea cannot be choosy. The transmission chain is about to jump species. This is the moment historians call the spillover event. Spillover. The fleas jump. They land on an exposed arm, a neck, or a leg. The human sleeps on. They feel a tiny itch. Maybe they slap their leg in their sleep. But it is too late. The bite has happened. The regurgitation has happened. The bacteria, Yersinia pestis, has just entered the human bloodstream. The rat is dead. The flea is dying of starvation. But the bacteria? The bacteria has just discovered a new, vast world to conquer. The human wakes up. It is a Tuesday morning. They feel tired but normal. They go to the market. They walk to the church. They talk to neighbors. They do not know that inside their body a clock has started ticking. How long do they have? 2 days, 5 days. And what happens when the invisible enemy reaches the human lymph nodes? The body reacts with a violence that terrified the medieval world. Get ready. The great mortality is about to begin. Wednesday passes, Thursday passes. The human, let's call him Thomas, feels fine. This period of silence is dangerous. In medicine, we have a specific name for this time gap between infection and sickness. Incubation period. During the incubation period, Thomas is a walking ghost. He is working. He is eating pottage. But inside his lymphatic system, the bacteria are traveling. They are hijacking his immune cells. They are moving towards the checkpoints of the body, the lymph nodes. Then the silence breaks. It starts with a shiver. It is not cold outside, but Thomas cannot stop shaking. His teeth chatter. This is the onset. Onset. The onset of the plague is sudden. It hits like a hammer. 1 minute you are standing, the next you are on the floor. A fever begins. But this is not a normal fever. It is a fire. The body temperature spikes. Thomas falls into a state of confusion. He starts muttering words that make no sense. We call this mental state delirium. But the terror, the thing that gave the Black Death its legendary reputation, happens next. Thomas feels a sharp pain, not in his stomach, not in his head, but in his groin, or perhaps under his armpit, or on his neck. Why these places? Because these are the locations of the major lymph nodes. The lymph nodes are the body's defense stations. They are trying to trap the bacteria. They are trying to fight, but they are losing. The node begins to change shape. It grows hard. It grows angry. Here is the essential verb, to swell. The node swells. It starts the size of an almond, then a walnut, then an egg. Finally, it can become as large as an apple. This swelling has a famous historical name. It is called a bubo. Say it. Bubo. Biubo. This is where we get the name bubonic plague. The bubo is excruciatingly painful. If you touch it, the victim screams. It is filled with bacteria, dead immune cells, and blood. It turns purple, sometimes black. Imagine the horror in a small London room. There are no doctors with antibiotics. There is no understanding of bacteria. Thomas's wife looks at the swelling. She sees the black mark. She does not see a biological reaction. She sees a curse. She sees God's punishment. And the biology to society mirror breaks here. Internally, the immune system is overwhelmed by a pathogen. Externally, the family is overwhelmed by fear. The transmission chain we discussed earlier, rat to flea to human, has finished its first journey. But now, a new question arises. Is Thomas contagious? Contagious. This is a point of great confusion in history. Strictly speaking, bubonic plague, from the flea bite, is not easily spread directly from human to human, unless the fleas move from Thomas to his wife. However, if the bacteria reaches Thomas's lungs, the game changes completely. But for now, Thomas is lying in the straw. The fleas that bit him are likely still in the room. They are still hungry. They are seeking the next heat source. The wife leans in to wipe Thomas's forehead. She is close, very close. And outside, the neighbors hear the groans. The word spreads faster than the germ. Sickness. The shutters close. The door is bolted. To bolt, they bolt the doors. But they do not realize that the enemy is already inside. The enemy can climb. The enemy is in the roof. The city of London is about to wake up to a nightmare. The outbreak is no longer a collection of random deaths. It is becoming a wave. And when a wave hits a crowded city, it needs fuel. London provided the perfect fuel, density. In the next part, we will leave the sick room and step out into the medieval street. We need to see why London was built to die. We will look at the architecture of the transmission chain. Prepare for the smell. Step outside the door. Hold your breath. If you think modern cities are crowded during rush hour, You are not prepared for London in 1348. We are now walking down a typical street. But look up. Do you see the sky? Probably not. The houses are built with a peculiar architectural feature called jetties. The second floor sticks out further than the first. The third floor sticks out further than the second. At the top, the houses from opposite sides of the street almost touch. They are like lovers leaning in for a kiss. This is romantic for a poet. It is a superhighway for a rat. A rat does not need to touch the ground to travel from one end of London to the other. It can simply run across the touching roofs. The transmission chain has a dedicated lane right above your head. Down below, the situation is even worse. This brings us to a critical noun. Density. Density. London had high density. People were packed together like sardines in a tin. A single room might house a family, a servant, and perhaps a pig or a few chickens. This density creates an environment we call congested. Congested. The streets are congested, the houses are congested, and this congestion acts as an amplifier. To amplify. The crowding amplifies the spread of the fleas. If you stand shoulder to shoulder with a stranger in the market, a flea can easily jump from his coat to yours. You do not need to touch the rat. You only need to touch the neighbor who has the flea. And then there is the ground. Look down. You are standing in something wet and brown. Is it mud? No. In 1348, there is no modern plumbing. There are no flush toilets. People throw their waste out of the window and into the street. There is a channel in the middle of the road called a kennel. This leads to our next concept, sanitation. And London had almost zero sanitation. The waste piles up. It creates a warm, rotting layer of organic matter. Remember what we said about the flea. The flea likes warmth. The rat likes food. The garbage in the street is a buffet for the rat. It is a heater for the flea. The city itself is a biological reactor. It is designed, accidentally, to keep the transmission chain alive. We arrive at the market, Cheapside, or perhaps Billingsgate. This is the heart of the city. It is where you buy bread, cloth, and fish. It is also the central hub for infection. In network science, we call this a super-spreader event. A farmer brings grain from the countryside. His cart has rats. A merchant brings cloth from the port. His cloth has fleas. A housewife comes to buy flour. She has a warm body. They all meet in the center. The flea jumps from the cloth to the housewife. She walks home to a different neighborhood. She brings the Trojan horse into her clean house. Trojan horse. She cooks dinner. She feels an itch on her ankle. She scratches it. The cycle begins again. But now, the numbers are changing. It is no longer one ship. It is no longer one rat. It is hundreds, then thousands. The death toll begins to rise. At first, the church bells ring for every funeral. Dong, dong. But soon, the ringing happens too often. It becomes annoying. It becomes terrifying. And then, the authorities make a decision. They realize the air is bad. They do not know about the bacteria. They believe in miasma, the idea that bad smells cause disease. So, what do? They try to clean the streets. They try to move the waste. But in doing so, they disturb the rats. They disturb the fleas. By trying to fix the problem, they accidentally force the vectors to move even faster. Panic begins to set in. People stop going to the market. Shops close. The city falls silent. But inside the bodies of the victims, the bacteria is evolving again. It is finding a new way to travel. A way that does not need a rat. A way that does not need a flea. It only needs a cough. We are about to enter the darkest phase of the plague. The moment when the chain breaks loose from the animal kingdom and becomes purely human. The pneumonic plague is coming. And for this, you do not need to be bitten. You just need to breathe. Listen to that sound. That is not just a cough. That is the sound of the transmission chain breaking its final link. Until now, the plague needed help. It needed the rat. It needed the flea. It was a clumsy, complex process. But nature always seeks efficiency. And inside the crowded houses of London, the bacteria found a shortcut. It moved from the lymph nodes to the lungs. When Yersinia pestis enters the lungs, the disease transforms. It changes from bubonic plague to pneumonic plague. This is the most dangerous moment in our story. Let's return to the room with Thomas. He is no longer just feverish. He is struggling to breathe. His chest feels heavy, like a stone is sitting on it. He sits up. He coughs violently. A spray of red liquid flies from his mouth. In science, we call these droplets. These droplets are not just water. They are microscopic bombs. Each droplet contains thousands of bacteria. Standing next to the bed is a priest. In 1348, priests were the frontline workers, and they came to hear the final confessions of the dying. The priest leans in close to hear Thomas whisper his sins. Thomas coughs again. The droplets fly through the air. The priest breathes in. Here is the verb. To inhale. Now, stop. Look at the chain. Where is the rat? Gone. Where is the flea? Gone. The bacteria has learned to fly. We describe this new form of transmission with a specific adjective, airborne. The plague is now airborne. This changes the speed of the disaster. With the flea, you might live for a week. With pneumonic plague, the timeline shrinks. The priest will likely be dead within 48 hours. Sometimes, people went to bed healthy and never woke up. It was almost 100% fatal. The biology has shifted. And because the biology shifted, the society began to fracture. Imagine the psychological terror. With the rats, so you could perhaps kill them. You could clean the floor. But how do you fight the air? How do you stop breathing? You cannot. So, a new behavior emerges. It is a behavior that destroys the soul of the community. Avoidance. People stop visiting the sick. Mothers look at their children with suspicion. If a husband coughs, the wife recoils in terror. The biology to society mirror is now reflecting total isolation. Internal. The lungs are filling with fluid, isolating the body from oxygen. External. The people are locking their doors, isolating themselves from their neighbors. The text from the time tells us incredible, sad stories. A chronicler in Italy wrote, "Fathers abandoned their children. Wives abandoned their husbands. One brother abandoned another. Why? Because love was no longer enough. The risk of inhaling death was too high. The social contract, the unwritten agreement that we take care of each other, was dissolving. To dissolve, trust dissolved, families dissolved. London is now a city of closed doors. The markets are empty. The grass begins to grow in the streets because no one is walking on them. But the death toll is still rising. The cemeteries are full. The priests are dying so fast, there is no one left to perform the funerals. So, what do you do with the bodies? The city faces a logistical nightmare. The transmission chain has created a surplus of death that the medieval infrastructure cannot handle. In the next part, we must walk to the edge of the city. We must look at the ground. We will learn the vocabulary of burial and we will see how the shape of the land itself was changed by the bodies of the fallen. The plague pit is waiting. We are outside the city walls now. We are at a place called East Smithfield. Usually a funeral is a personal event. There is crying. There is a coffin. There is a name carved in stone. But here, there are no names. The transmission chain moved so fast that the rituals of death collapsed. The priests are dead. The grave diggers are dead. The carpenters who make coffins are dead. So, the city makes a brutal calculation. They switch from burial to disposal. Look at the ground. A long, deep cut has been made in the earth. This is a trench. It is not a hole for one person. It is a hole for hundreds. The men working here are covered in cloth. They hold vinegar-soaked sponges to their noses to block the smell. And they work quickly. They are afraid. Carts arrive from the city. They are piled high with bodies wrapped in simple linen sheets. We call these sheets shrouds. The workers lift the bodies. They lower them into the trench. They do not place them side by side. There is no space for that. They place them one on top of the other. A chronicler from the time famously wrote, "They were stacked like lasagna," or, to use his exact words, like layers of cheese and pasta. This brings us to a grim but necessary verb, to stack. They stack the bodies, then they throw a thin layer of dirt, then they stack more bodies, then more dirt. This is a mass grave. In East Smithfield alone, archaeologists have found thousands of skeletons. This site was an emergency measure. It was the city trying to cope with capacity. Capacity. The churchyards had reached capacity. The ground was full. The system was broken. This mirrors the biological breakdown inside the body. Inside the victim, the lymph nodes reached capacity and burst. Outside in the city, the graveyards reached capacity and spilled over. The biology to society mirror is complete. The chaos of the cells became the chaos of the streets. But look closer at the men digging the trench. They are tired. They are few. Why? Because the labor force is vanishing. This is the next great consequence of the transmission chain. The bacteria did not just kill people, it killed the economy. Imagine a farm. The wheat is ready to be harvested. It is golden and heavy. But there is no one to cut it. The scythe lies rusting in the field. The farmer is dead. His sons are dead. The crops rot in the field. The sheep wander into the woods because there is no shepherd to watch them. This leads to a paradox. Paradox. Here is the paradox. The population is dropping, but the price of food is dropping too, at first, because there is no one to buy it. But soon, the value of labor, the value of a human being working, is about to skyrocket. For centuries, the peasant was worth nothing. He was tied to the land. He was a serf. But now, the peasant is rare. If you are a survivor, you are suddenly valuable. The transmission chain has finished its work of destruction. The rats are gone or hiding. The fleas are waiting. The dead are in the trench. But for those who are still standing, the world has completely changed. The silence of the grave is about to be replaced by the noise of a revolution of money, a revolution of rights. Some in the next part, we will watch the balance of power shift. We will see how a tiny bacteria gave the poor man a weapon against the rich man. The feudal system is about to crack. The plague has passed. The fires are out. The fresh graves have settled. We stand in a field in Essex, just outside London. The year is 1349. The sun is shining, but the farm is quiet. Too quiet. Usually this field would be full of men with scythes, cutting the wheat. Today, there is only one man. He leans on his tool. He looks tired, but he also looks confident. Approaching him is the lord of the manor. The lord is dressed in fine wool, but his face is red with anger. He needs his crop harvested now. If the wheat stays in the field, it will rot. If it rots, the lord loses his income. He points at the worker, and he offers the standard wage, 2 pennies a day. In 1347, the worker would have bowed. He would have said, "Thank you, my lord." He would have worked until his back broke. But this is 1349. The mathematics of the world have changed. The worker looks around. He sees no other men. They are all dead. He is the only one left. He looks at the lord. He does not bow. He says, "No, I want 4 pennies, and I want lunch included." The lord is shocked. This is rebellion. This is against the natural order. But what can he do? He cannot harvest the field himself. He has soft hands. This moment captures the greatest economic shift in medieval history. It brings us to a fundamental concept: scarcity. Before the plague, people were abundant. Land was scarce. Therefore, labor was cheap, and land was expensive. After the plague, the equation flipped, and land was everywhere, empty farms. People were scarce. Suddenly, the peasant had leverage. Leverage. The transmission chain killed the population, but it gave the survivors leverage. The worker could walk away. He could go to the next village. Someone else would pay him. The English language captures this shift with the verb to negotiate. For the first time, the poor could negotiate. This terrified the ruling class. The elite, the lords, the dukes, the king, did not see this as economics. They saw it as chaos. They saw it as the poor forgetting their place. So, the empire struck back. In 1351, the king and parliament passed a famous law, the Statute of Labourers. Listen to the grammar of power here. They did not ask. They commanded. The law stated that everyone under the age of 60 must work. And critically, they must work for the wages paid before the plague. They tried to freeze time. They tried to use a law to stop the market, to enforce. They tried to enforce the old wages. If a peasant asked for more money, he could be imprisoned. If a lord paid more money, he could be fined. But here is the lesson of history. You cannot legislate against reality. The biological reality, scarcity of humans, was stronger than the political reality, the king's law. Behind the backs of the sheriffs, deals were made. I will pay you the legal wage, but here is a bag of extra grain. I will pay you 2 pennies, but you can take the wood from the forest. The biology to society mirror shows us a system under tension. Internally, the body fights to recover homeostasis, balance, after the fever. Externally, the kingdom fights to recover feudal stability after the crash. But the balance was gone forever. The feudal system, the rigid pyramid of power, had a crack in the foundation. That crack was caused by a microscopic bacteria. The peasants began to realize their worth. They had tasted power. They had tasted money. And they were not going back to the old silence. The anger began to simmer. It would take another generation to fully boil over, leading to the peasants' revolt of 1381. But the fuse was lit here, in the quiet, empty fields of 1349. So, we have seen the rat, the flea, the bacteria, the death, the burial, and now, the money. But there is one final piece of the puzzle. How did this trauma change the English language itself? Because when half your population dies, your language does not stay the same. Words die. New words are born. The very sound of English was about to shift. In the next part, we will enter the classroom of history. We will see how the plague helped kill French and Latin, and gave rise to the English we speak today. The transmission of language is next. We are inside a schoolroom in Oxford, shortly after the Great Mortality. Before the rats came, this room sounded different. The teacher spoke in French. The students read in Latin. If you spoke English here, you were considered uneducated. You were a peasant. For 300 years, since the Norman conquest of 1066, England was a trilingual nation. 1. Latin, the language of the Church and God. 2. French, the language of the king, the court, and the law. 3. English, the language of the mud, the market, and the rat-catcher. But the transmission chain did not care about language. It did not care about status. In fact, the plague attacked the guardians of language, the priests and the teachers, with brutal efficiency. Why? Because the priests were the ones leaning over the dying. They were the ones inhaling the droplets. Historians estimate that nearly 50% of the clergy in England died. In some monasteries, everyone died. This created a massive void. Suddenly, the schools and churches were empty. There were no French masters left. There were no Latin experts left. But the work of the country had to continue. So the system had to improvise. They had to promote men who were less educated, men who did not know the fancy languages, men who only spoke the mother tongue. Mother tongue. This forced a monumental shift. Teachers began translating Latin lessons not into French, but into English. Why? And because the students didn't understand French anymore, and the new teachers couldn't teach it. This brings us to a critical linguistic term, vernacular, vernacular, vernacular. The plague forced the vernacular to rise. Listen to the words of a chronicler from that time, John Trevisa. He wrote that after the first pestilence, the method of teaching changed. He said, "Children in school, against the usage and manner of all other nations, be compelled for to leave their own language, and for to construe their lessons in English. The biology to society mirror is reflected here in the mouth of the nation. Internally, the body fought off the invader, the bacteria. Externally, the culture fought off the invader, French, and returned to its roots. By 1362, just over a decade after the Black Death, the king passed the statute of pleading. For the first time, court cases could be argued in English. Why? Because the lawyers were dead, the judges were new, and the people needed to understand the law to survive. This gives us the verb, to emerge. English emerged from the shadows. It was a rougher English. It was the English of Chaucer. It was full of new words borrowed from the crisis. But it was alive. If the rats had stayed on the ship, if the fleas had not bitten, you might be reading this script in a dialect of French today. The transmission chain killed millions, but it gave birth to the modern English language. It leveled the playing field. To level. But survival is not just about language and money. It is about the mind. It is about the soul. How do you process the grief of seeing half your world disappear? You paint, and you draw, you dance. In the late 14th century, a strange and terrifying new art form appeared on the walls of churches across England and Europe. It was not a picture of Jesus. It was not a picture of angels. It was a picture of skeletons, and they were dancing with kings. This is the psychological final stage of the infection. Acceptance. In the next part, we will look at the danse macabre. We will learn the vocabulary of art and mortality, and see how the survivors laughed in the face of death. The music is starting. Step into the cathedral. The air is cool and smells of incense and old stone. You look at the wall. You expect to see saints. You expect to see angels with golden halos. Instead, you see a skeleton. And he is dancing. He is not alone. He is holding hands with a pope. Next to them, another skeleton holds hands with a king, then a merchant, then a laborer, then a child. They are all dancing in a long, terrifying line towards a grave. This is the danse macabre, the dance of death. After the great mortality, art changed. Before the plague, death was often shown as a peaceful sleep. After the plague, death became active, it became aggressive, it became a character in the story. The survivors of 1348 had seen something that broke their understanding of the world. The flea bit the sinner and the saint with equal enthusiasm. This brings us to a powerful adjective, inevitable. The art was teaching a lesson. Death is inevitable. But look closer at the skeletons in the painting. They are often grinning. They look lively. This art was not just about fear. It was about satire. The plague was the ultimate satirist. It mocked the powerful. It stripped the king of his robes and showed him as just a collection of bones, exactly like the peasant. For the survivors, this was a coping mechanism. To laugh at death was a way to reclaim power over it. The biology to society mirror is stark here. Biologically, the bacteria reduces every human body to the same organic matter. Socially, the art reduces every social class to the same dancing skeleton. This artistic movement spread across Europe and England. It appeared in church murals, in books, and in carvings. It was a reminder of a concept we call memento mori. Remember, you must die. But it also taught a lesson about life. If life is short and death is around the corner, how should you live? For some, the answer was religious extreme. They whipped themselves. They prayed constantly. For others, the answer was pleasure. They drank. They bought fancy clothes with their new wages. They lived for the moment. We call this quality transient. They realized that life was transient. The transmission chain of the rat and flea had stripped away the illusions of permanence. Stone castles could not stop it. Gold coins could not bribe it. This trauma created a new kind of human resilience. The people of the late 14th century were tougher. They were more cynical, but they were also more alive. They rebuilt London. They paved over the mass graves. They built new houses on top of the old tragedies, and they never forgot. The lesson of the flea, that we are all connected, that we are all biological, and that we are all vulnerable, was burned into the cultural memory. We have now traced the journey from the ship to the grave, and from the grave to the art gallery. We have seen the biology of the gut and the sociology of the street. But now, we must finish our story. We must step back and look at the whole chain. What does the story of the Black Death teach us today, in our modern world of airplanes and antibiotics? The rats are still here. The bacteria is still here. In the final part, we will summarize the journey. We will review the critical verbs we have learned, and we will answer the final question. Could the chain reconnect? Get ready for the final transmission. We are back on the dock. The year is no longer 1348. The wooden ships are gone. The water is grey and churning. The skyline is filled with glass towers and cranes, but if you listen closely, the echo is still there. We have traveled a long way together. We started with a stowaway rat. We shrank down to the size of a flea. We watched a biological valve block. We saw the bacteria spill over into the human bloodstream. We walked the crowded streets, stood in the silent sick rooms, and watched the shovels in the graveyard. We saw how a microscopic organism broke the feudal system and gave birth to the English language. This brings us to our final, and perhaps most important, noun: resilience. Resilience. London is a monument to resilience. The people who survived the Great Mortality did not just live. They adapted to adapt. The bacteria adapted to the flea. The flea adapted to the blockage. The human society adapted to the loss. This is the ultimate lesson of the transmission chain. It is not just a line of death. It is a loop of survival. Let's review the chain one last time, using the language we have mastered. 1. The vector, the rat and flea, carried the pathogen. 2. The bacteria multiplied and blocked the flea's gut. 3. The flea regurgitated the infection into the human host. 4. The disease became airborne and amplified in the crowded city. 5. The society collapsed, then emerged stronger, with a new voice and a new economy. History is not just dates and names. It is biology. It is mechanics. It is a system. Today, Yersinia pestis still exists. It lives in ground squirrels in America, in rodents in Asia. The chain is not destroyed. It is only sleeping. But we are different now. We understand the mechanism. We have the vocabulary to describe the invisible world. When you walk through a city, remember what lies beneath your feet. Remember the silence of 1348. And remember that the language you speak, the English that connects us right now, was forged in the fire of that crisis. The rat is just an animal. The flea is just an insect. But together, they wrote history. Thank you for walking the gritty chronicles with me. Keep listening. Keep learning. And remember to wash your hands. I'm your narrator. This has been the story of the transmission chain.